Did your grandmother have kitchen tricks that seemed like magic? That cast iron skillet she never washed with soap, the pantry where nothing ever spoiled. Today we're exploring 20 oddly useful food hacks our grandparents knew, and we forgot. There's something humbling about realizing that the smartest person in the kitchen might have been your grandmother all along. We live in an age of instant everything, refrigerators that tell us when we're low on milk, apps that deliver groceries in under an hour, plastic containers designed to keep things fresh for weeks. And yet, with all this modern convenience at our fingertips, we've somehow forgotten how to actually handle food. Think about that for a moment. During the 1940s, the average American household wasted only about 5% of their food. Today, that number has ballooned to nearly 40%. We throw away almost half of what we buy. Our grandparents would be horrified. They learned their kitchen wisdom the hard way, through necessity. The Great Depression taught an entire generation that nothing could be wasted. World War II brought rationing that forced families to stretch every ingredient to its absolute limit. These weren't people looking up tips on the internet. They were surviving, adapting, and passing down knowledge that had been refined over generations. Somewhere along the way, we stopped listening. Modern refrigeration made us lazy. Preservatives in processed foods meant we didn't have to think about freshness anymore. We traded practical knowledge for convenience, and we lost something valuable in the exchange. But here's the beautiful thing, that wisdom didn't disappear entirely. It's still out there, waiting to be rediscovered. And honestly, it's more relevant now than it's been in decades. With food prices climbing higher every month and families looking for ways to stretch their budgets, these old techniques aren't just nostalgic curiosities. They're genuinely useful tools. Today we're going back to basics. We're exploring 20 oddly useful food hacks that our grandparents knew by heart, and that most of us have completely forgotten. Some of these will save you money. Others will reduce waste. Many will actually make your food taste better than anything you could buy at the store. How many of these techniques do you think you still use today? I'm betting some of you will be surprised by how much practical wisdom has slipped through the cracks. Let's start with the simplest ways to revive and preserve everyday staples. There's something almost magical about the smell of fresh bread coming out of the oven. That warm, yeasty aroma that fills the whole house. But what happens when that beautiful loaf sits on the counter for a few days? It gets hard, chewy, and disappointing. Well, our grandparents had a trick for that, and it's so simple, you'll wonder why you ever threw out a stale loaf. Reviving stale bread with steam was something every good homemaker knew how to do. You take that hard, crusty loaf that seems past its prime, give it a quick sprinkle of water, and pop it in a hot oven for just a few minutes. The steam penetrates the bread, rehydrating the starches that had dried out and gone rigid. When you pull it out, that crust is crispy again, the inside is soft and pillowy, and it tastes almost as good as the day it was baked. This wasn't about being cheap, though stretching every dollar certainly mattered back then. It was about respecting food and understanding that with a little know-how, you could bring things back to life instead of tossing them in the garbage. Speaking of bread-working miracles, here's another trick that saved countless batches of cookies and cakes over the years, using bread to soften brown sugar. We've all been there. You reach for that bag of brown sugar to make your grandmother's famous oatmeal cookies, and instead of soft, scoopable sweetness, you find a rock-hard brick that could probably be used as a doorstop. Our grandmothers simply dropped a slice of regular white bread into the container and closed it up tight. A 1952 Good Housekeeping article called this the housewife's secret weapon. The science wasn't understood back then, but we now know that the moisture from the bread slowly migrates to the sugar crystals, softening them and preventing that frustrating clumping. Give it a day or two, and that brown sugar is soft and ready to use. Grandma's trick saved countless batches of cookies from being abandoned because someone couldn't chisel through the sugar. Now let's talk about pie crust, because this is where things get really interesting. If you've ever wondered how certain bakers get those impossibly flaky, tender crusts that practically shatter when you bite into them, there are actually two secrets our grandparents knew well. First, grating cold butter for baking. Instead of cutting cold butter into flour with a pastry blender or your fingers, which can warm up the butter too quickly, they would stick that butter in the freezer until it was rock solid, then grate it using a box grater right into the flour. Those thin ribbons of frozen butter distributed evenly throughout the dough without ever getting soft. When the pie went into the oven, all those little bits of butter created steam pockets, producing layers upon layers of flaky goodness. It sounds almost too simple to make a real difference, but try it once and you'll understand why Grandma's pies always seemed better than anything you could make. The second pie crust secret involves an ingredient you might not expect: adding a splash of vinegar to the dough. Just a tablespoon or so of white vinegar or apple cider vinegar mixed into the ice water before you add it to your flour. This does something remarkable to the finished crust. It inhibits gluten development, which means your dough stays tender instead of getting tough and chewy. It also makes the dough much easier to roll out without tearing or springing back on you. The vinegar completely bakes off, so you don't taste it at all in the finished pie. Your grandmother probably learned this from her mother, who learned it from hers. It was just something every good baker knew. Did your family have a special pie crust secret passed down through generations? So many families had their own little tricks, and they guarded them like treasure. What ties all these techniques together is a deep understanding of how moisture and temperature work in baking. Stale bread needs moisture added back. Brown sugar needs to borrow moisture from bread. Butter needs to stay cold to create flaky layers. Pie dough needs vinegar to stay tender. Our grandparents might not have used scientific language to describe what they were doing, but they absolutely understood these principles through years of practice and observation. From reviving bread to keeping produce fresh, our grandparents had equally clever solutions for fruits and vegetables. Now let's talk about something every home cook has dealt with since the beginning of time. Cut an apple or slice an avocado, walk away for a few minutes, and you come back to find it turned brown and unappealing. Our grandparents had a simple fix that costs almost nothing. Lemon to keep fruit fresh. A light coat of lemon juice on cut apples, avocados, pears, or any fruit that browns quickly creates an invisible barrier against oxidation. The citric acid in lemon juice works faster than oxygen can damage the exposed flesh. Grandma would slice up apples for a pie and give them a quick squeeze of lemon before setting them aside. Those apples would stay crisp and white for hours. She might not have known the science behind it, but she understood that lemon juice prevented that ugly browning that made good fruit look spoiled. The acidity essentially puts a pause button on the natural chemical reaction that happens when fruit meets air. A single lemon could protect an entire bowl of sliced fruit for a family gathering. Today we reach for expensive anti-browning products, but a lemon from the fruit bowl does the same job for pennies. That tartness blends right into most recipes anyway, or you can barely taste it on fresh fruit. Storing apples with potatoes. Here's a trick that sounds almost like a grandmother's tale, but it's grounded in real chemistry she probably never studied. Keep your apples stored near your potatoes, and those potatoes will resist sprouting for much longer. This technique dates back to at least the 1890s, when root cellars were common fixtures in farmhouses across America. Farmers began noticing that potatoes stored in barrels near their apple supplies lasted significantly longer than those kept alone. Those white sprouts that make potatoes go soft and unusable took much longer to appear. What our grandparents discovered through observation, scientists later confirmed through research. Apples naturally release ethylene gas as they ripen. That same gas actually suppresses the enzyme in potatoes that triggers sprouting. Grandma's intuition was backed by chemistry she never learned in any classroom. She just knew it worked because her mother taught her, and her grandmother before that. A few apples tucked into your potato bin could add weeks to your potato supply. During times when every bit of food mattered, this simple storage trick prevented waste and stretched the family budget further. Ripening fruit in paper bags. Speaking of ethylene gas, our grandparents discovered another way to use natural plant chemistry to their advantage. When you needed rock-hard peaches or green bananas to ripen quickly, you didn't just wait and hope. You grabbed a paper bag from the kitchen drawer and put that fruit inside. The paper bag traps the ethylene gas that fruits naturally release as they mature. That concentrated gas signals the fruit to ripen faster than it would sitting exposed on the counter. Close the top loosely and leave it at room temperature for a day or two. Those hard peaches transform into juicy, fragrant fruit, ready for eating. Those green bananas develop their sweet flavor and soften perfectly. The paper bag allows just enough airflow to prevent moisture buildup while keeping the ripening gas concentrated right where you need it. Plastic bags don't work the same way because they trap too much moisture and cause rot. Grandma knew paper was the key, even if she never heard the word ethylene in her life. Want to speed things up even more? Add an apple to that bag with your unripe fruit. The apple pumps out extra ethylene, and the whole process accelerates. Soaking wilted greens in cold water. There's nothing sadder than pulling lettuce from the icebox and finding it limp and lifeless. Before you throw those greens in the compost, try what grandmother always did. Fill a bowl with ice-cold water and submerge those wilted leaves completely. Let them soak for about 30 minutes and watch the magic happen. Those sad, droopy leaves perk right back up like they just came from the garden. The cold water gets absorbed through the plant cells in a process that restores what scientists call turgidity. That's just a fancy word for the water pressure inside the cells that keeps leaves crisp and firm. Lettuce, spinach, herbs, celery, even slightly wilted carrots respond to this treatment beautifully. Grandma would revive an entire head of lettuce this way, then spin it dry in a clean kitchen towel. Nothing went to waste if it could be saved. This trick alone probably saved families countless dollars over the years when every head of lettuce represented money spent and effort made. Storing onions in stockings. Remember when every pantry had onions hanging in old stockings from a hook or nail? That image might seem strange to younger folks today, but it was practical wisdom passed down through generations. Grandma would drop an onion into the toe of an old stocking, tie a knot above it, add another onion, tie another knot, and continue until the stocking was full. She'd hang that string of onions in a cool, dry spot in the pantry or cellar. The breathable fabric allowed constant air circulation around each onion. That airflow prevented the moisture buildup that causes mold and rot. Each onion stayed separated from the others, so if one did spoil, it couldn't spread to its neighbors. When she needed an onion, she simply cut below the bottom knot, and one dropped right out. The remaining onions stayed perfectly preserved. Onions stored this way could last for months. Those old nylon stockings found new purpose instead of being thrown away. Share your memories of pantry onions hanging in stockings in the comments below. So many of us remember that exact sight from our grandmother's kitchens. Before we move on, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, a like and a subscribe truly helps us continue making these videos for you. We really appreciate it. Now let's explore the world of herbs, spices, and the clever ways our grandparents built incredible flavor into everything they cooked. Freezing fresh herbs in fat. Now here's something your grandmother probably did without thinking twice, but it's pure genius when you stop and consider it. Fresh herbs from the garden don't last long sitting on the counter or even in the refrigerator. Within a week, that beautiful bunch of basil turns black and slimy. Parsley goes yellow and limp. Chives lose their punch entirely. Our grandparents couldn't afford to waste a single sprig, so they developed a preservation method that actually improves the herbs in some ways. They'd chop up fresh herbs fine, pack them into ice cube trays, and cover them completely with melted butter or olive oil. Once frozen solid, they'd pop those little flavor bombs into a bag and keep them in the freezer for months. 6 months or longer, and those herbs would taste nearly as vibrant as the day they were picked. The fat creates a protective barrier that locks out freezer burn and oxidation. It also captures the volatile oils that give herbs their distinctive flavor, oils that would otherwise evaporate into thin air if you tried to dry those same herbs. The practical beauty of this method goes even further. When you're making a pan sauce or sautéing vegetables, you just drop in a cube. The butter or oil melts right into your cooking while releasing perfectly preserved herb flavor throughout the dish. No measuring, no last-minute chopping, no running to the store because your fresh herbs went bad 3 days ago. Depression-era cooks perfected this technique because they understood something fundamental about stretching limited ingredients through clever technique rather than spending money they didn't have. Toasting spices before cooking. Speaking of releasing flavor, let's talk about what happens when you toast whole spices before using them. This is one of those techniques that separates ordinary home cooking from something truly memorable, and it costs absolutely nothing extra. Your grandmother knew that cumin seeds straight from the jar taste completely different from cumin seeds that have spent 60 seconds in a dry, hot skillet. The science behind this is fascinating, though our grandparents didn't need to understand the chemistry to know it worked. When you apply gentle heat to whole spices, you're triggering something called the Maillard reaction while simultaneously releasing essential oils that are otherwise locked inside. Those oils carry the real flavor, the complexity and depth that make people ask what your secret ingredient is. Dry toasting in a cast iron pan, watching until the spices just start to darken and the kitchen fills with that incredible aroma, transforms the entire character of the spice. This takes maybe 90 seconds. You heat a small skillet, add your whole spices with no oil at all, and swirl them around until they become fragrant and slightly darker. Then you grind them fresh. The difference between pre-ground cumin from a jar that's been sitting on your shelf for 2 years and cumin seeds you just toasted and ground yourself is the difference between hearing a song on a cheap phone speaker versus hearing it performed live. One is a faded copy of the other. Adding salt to coffee. Now this next one might sound strange if you've never heard it, but I'd bet some of you are already nodding along because your grandfather swore by it. A tiny pinch of salt added to coffee grounds before brewing removes that harsh, bitter edge that makes you wince. Not enough salt to actually taste salty, just a few grains, maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon for a full pot. Did anyone else's grandfather insist on a pinch of salt in his morning coffee? This trick was standard practice in Navy mess halls during World War II, where the coffee quality was notoriously poor. Sailors discovered this decades before food scientists could explain why it worked. A 1946 survey found that 73% of returning veterans continued the practice at home after the war ended. They'd learned it on ships and in barracks where the coffee was cheap, over-roasted, and often stale. The sodium ions actually block the taste receptors on your tongue that detect bitterness. You're not masking the taste with something sweet, you're genuinely preventing your tongue from perceiving that harsh note in the first place. This meant Navy cooks could serve acceptable coffee without adding sugar they didn't have, and veterans could enjoy their morning cup without reaching for the sugar bowl. Layering salt gradually. And while we're talking about salt, here's perhaps the most important seasoning lesson our grandparents understood instinctively. You don't add all your salt at the end of cooking. You layer it in gradually, seasoning a little bit at each stage of the process. This single technique is the difference between restaurant food that tastes complex and home cooking that tastes flat, even when you've followed the recipe exactly. When you salt only at the end, the seasoning sits on the surface. It tastes sharp and obvious. But when you add small amounts throughout, the salt has time to penetrate ingredients, draw out natural flavors, and meld into the dish. A pinch when you saute your onions, a pinch when you add your tomatoes, a pinch when the broth goes in, a final adjustment at the end. Each addition builds on the last, creating balanced flavor without ever making anything taste oversalted. Our grandparents seasoned this way because they cooked by instinct and taste, not by measuring spoons and exact recipes. They tasted as they went, adjusting constantly, building flavor layer by layer. This approach actually uses less salt overall while creating more flavorful food. You end up with depth and complexity rather than a dish that just tastes like salt was dumped on top. From enhancing flavors to transforming tough ingredients, our grandparents knew how to make the most of every cut of meat and every pot of beans. Saving bacon grease for cooking. Now here's something that might separate the generations more than almost anything else we've talked about. If you grew up in a home where your grandmother cooked, chances are you remember that jar sitting right by the stove. Maybe it was an old coffee can. Maybe it was a glass jar with a metal lid. But whatever container it was, it held something precious, rendered bacon grease. And your grandmother treated that stuff like liquid gold because that's exactly what it was to her. During the Depression years, the average American family kept that jar of bacon grease within arm's reach at all times. It was simply too valuable to throw away. A cookbook from 1935 actually listed 47 different uses for rendered bacon fat. 47. That tells you everything you need to know about how previous generations viewed what we might casually scrape into the trash today. They'd use it to fry eggs in the morning. They'd add a spoonful to green beans simmering on the stove. It went into cornbread batter. It seasoned cast iron skillets. Some folks even used it to make soap or treat leather. Every drop had a purpose because every drop represented something they couldn't afford to waste. The flavor bacon grease adds is genuinely irreplaceable. Vegetables cooked in that rendered fat take on this deep, savory, slightly smoky quality that butter or vegetable oil simply cannot match. Pinto beans with a tablespoon of bacon grease taste like they've been cooking for days, even when they haven't. Cornbread made with bacon fat instead of plain oil has this richness that takes you straight back to your grandmother's kitchen. How many of you still have a bacon grease jar in your kitchen like Grandma did? If you do, you understand exactly what I'm talking about, and if you don't, well, maybe it's time to start one. Cooking tougher cuts low and slow. Your grandmother knew something about meat that too many people have forgotten. The cheapest cuts are often the most flavorful. You just have to know how to treat them. While we might reach for expensive tenderloin or premium steaks, previous generations understood that chuck roast, brisket, pork shoulder, and other tough cuts could become absolutely tender and delicious with one simple technique: low heat and lots of time. The science here is straightforward. Tough cuts come from muscles the animal used frequently. They're full of connective tissue called collagen. When you try to cook these cuts quickly over high heat, that collagen stays tough and chewy. But when you cook them slowly at lower temperatures, something magical happens. That collagen breaks down into gelatin. The meat becomes fork tender. All those fibers that were fighting against you suddenly surrender and become silky and rich. This is why your grandmother would put a pot roast in the oven first thing on a Sunday morning and let it cook for 4 or 5 hours. She'd use a heavy Dutch oven with a tight-fitting lid. Maybe she'd add some carrots, potatoes, and onions around the edges. The whole house would fill with that incredible smell as the afternoon went on. By dinner time, that inexpensive cut of beef would literally fall apart at the touch of a fork. The gravy made from those pan drippings was rich and deeply satisfying, Sunday's roast became Monday's hash, Tuesday's soup, and Wednesday's pot pie. Nothing was wasted because nothing could be. That's how families stretched a few dollars worth of meat across an entire week. Roasting bones for broth. Speaking of getting every last bit of value from meat, let's talk about making stock. Now, plenty of people still make homemade broth, but here's the step many skip that our grandparents never would. Roasting the bones first. This single technique transforms ordinary broth into something restaurant quality. Before those bones ever hit the stock pot, our grandparents would spread them on a sheet pan and roast them in a hot oven until they turned deep brown. Sometimes they'd add onion halves and carrot chunks to roast alongside. This browning process, which professional cooks call the Maillard reaction, creates hundreds of new flavor compounds that simply don't exist in unroasted bones. The resulting stock has this deep amber color and complex, almost caramelized taste that raw bones can never achieve. The frugality here is remarkable when you think about it. Those bones were headed for the trash anyway. Maybe they came from last night's roast chicken or the ham from Sunday dinner. Instead of throwing them away, Grandma would collect them in a bag in the freezer until she had enough. Then she'd roast them, cover them with cold water, add some vegetable scraps she'd also been saving, and let everything simmer for hours. The result was a stock so flavorful and nourishing that it formed the foundation for dozens of other dishes. Adding baking soda to beans. Here's a trick that seems almost too simple to work, but it absolutely does. When cooking dried beans, our grandparents would add just a pinch of baking soda to the soaking water or the cooking pot. That tiny addition made a significant difference. The beans cooked faster and came out creamier. The chemistry makes sense once you understand it. Baking soda is alkaline, and that alkaline environment breaks down the pectin in bean skins much more efficiently than plain water. The result is beans that soften in considerably less time, sometimes cutting cooking time by 30% or more. For generations who cooked dried beans regularly, that time savings added up. It also meant less fuel used for cooking, which mattered when you were counting every penny. The key is using just a small amount. Too much baking soda can make beans taste soapy or cause them to get mushy. A quarter teaspoon per pound of dried beans is usually plenty. Your grandmother probably never measured, just added a pinch from her jar and trusted her experience. Turning leftovers into soups. Finally, perhaps no technique better represents the waste-nothing philosophy of previous generations than the art of turning leftovers into soup. Small portions of vegetables, bits of meat too small for another meal, that last cup of rice or noodles, these weren't problems to solve. They were ingredients waiting for their moment. The stock pot on Grandma's stove was essentially a recycling center for food. Throughout the week, small amounts of this and that would go in. A few spoonfuls of green beans from Tuesday. The end pieces of roast from Sunday. Those slightly wilted carrots that needed using. Some broth made from roasted bones. By week's end, what emerged was a soup that tasted like it had been carefully planned, when really it was just good sense and economy working together. This approach stretched meals remarkably efficiently. A family could eat well all week on what many modern households would simply discard. The soup was never the same twice, but it was always nourishing and satisfying. From making the most of proteins to perfecting everyday cooking techniques, our final group of hacks covers methods that improved everything Grandma made. Salting eggplant before frying. If you've ever bitten into a piece of fried eggplant that tasted bitter and soaked up oil like a sponge, you probably skipped a step that your grandmother would never have forgotten. Salting eggplant before cooking wasn't just an old wives' tale or some kind of kitchen superstition. It was genuine food science that home cooks understood long before anyone used that term. Italian grandmothers called this process purging the bitterness, and it's a technique that has been documented in Mediterranean cooking since the 1700s. They knew exactly what they were doing, even if they couldn't explain it in scientific language. Here's what actually happens when you slice an eggplant and spread salt across those creamy white surfaces. The salt draws moisture out through a process we now call osmosis. You'd see little beads of liquid forming on the surface within 20 or 30 minutes. That liquid carried with it the compounds that made eggplant taste bitter, especially in older or larger specimens. But something else happened too, something even more important for the final dish. Those air pockets inside the eggplant flesh would collapse as the moisture left. And those air pockets were the reason eggplant acted like a sponge when you dropped it in hot oil. Without them, the slices absorbed far less fat during frying. The result was eggplant that was tender on the inside, beautifully golden on the outside, and not sitting in a puddle of grease on your plate. Grandma achieved better texture, better flavor, and healthier cooking, all with nothing more than salt and patience. She didn't need fancy equipment or special ingredients. She just knew her vegetables intimately, understood how they behaved, and worked with their nature rather than against it. Thickening soups with mashed potatoes. Speaking of kitchen wisdom that seems almost too simple to work, let's talk about what grandmothers did when they wanted a creamy soup without reaching for flour or cream. They used leftover mashed potatoes. That half cup of mashed potatoes sitting in the refrigerator from last night's dinner wasn't destined for the trash or even for reheating. It was an ingredient waiting for its second act. When you stir mashed potatoes into a simmering soup, something wonderful happens. The potato starch disperses gradually through the liquid, thickening it gently without creating the lumps that flour can leave behind. You didn't need to make a roux or worry about that raw flour taste that comes from not cooking it long enough. The potatoes were already cooked, already smooth, and they blended right in. This technique worked beautifully in vegetable soups, chicken soups, even chowders. It added body and richness while also stretching the meal further. Your grandmother could feed one more person at the table just by making the soup a little heartier with ingredients she already had on hand. Nothing went to waste in those kitchens. Every leftover had potential. Every scrap had purpose. That's what made these cooks so remarkable. They didn't follow recipes so much as they followed instincts developed over years of paying attention, of watching their own mothers and grandmothers, of understanding ingredients not as items on a list, but as living things with personalities and possibilities. What cooking technique did you learn from watching your grandmother that you still use today? These methods might seem old-fashioned, but they represent something we've largely lost in the age of convenience foods and instant everything. Our grandparents knew their ingredients the way you know an old friend, and that knowledge made everything they cooked taste like home. And there you have it, 20 simple food hacks that our grandparents knew by heart and practiced without a second thought. These weren't fancy culinary techniques they learned from cookbooks or cooking shows. This was everyday wisdom, passed down through generations, born from necessity and refined through years of practice in kitchens just like yours. When you think about it, each of these techniques carries something precious. They're little pieces of the people who came before us, preserved not in photographs or letters, but in the way we handle food. Every time you save that bacon grease in a jar by the stove, you're doing exactly what your grandmother did. Every time you toss a slice of bread into hardened brown sugar, you're keeping a tradition alive that stretches back further than any of us can remember. There's something deeply comforting about that connection. These methods work just as well today as they did 50 or 60 years ago. The science hasn't changed. Ethylene still ripens fruit, salt still cuts bitterness, cold water still revives wilted greens. Our grandparents figured all this out through trial and error, and they handed it down to us like a gift we almost forgot to open. Here's what I love most about this kind of knowledge. It saves money, it reduces waste, and it makes you a better cook, all while honoring the memory of people who shaped who you are. That's pretty remarkable for something as simple as knowing how to store onions properly. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 20 food hacks will you try first? And what kitchen wisdom did your family pass down that we didn't cover today? Share those secrets in the comments, because I know there are hundreds more waiting to be remembered. Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and share it with a friend who might remember these too. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another journey into the past.